The Atheist-based Patreon project presents Bible Zombies. Wow! It's Good Friday. No, actually it's not. We're nowhere near Good Friday. It's much closer to Halloween, and by the time you see this, Halloween will be over. But this is about zombies, and this story actually works well for Good Friday, or Easter Sunday, or Halloween. And by Bible zombies, I'm not talking about the average Christian sitting in the pews being spoon-fed stuff that they don't understand and don't bother to look into, even though that might apply, and zombies might be a pretty good description of how most of them, the dead in Christ, I suppose, how they actually do things. This is a little different. We're going to do an actual Bible study, because I knew this, but there was one subtle thing about this story that I had either overlooked or forgotten or never learned until just this week. And I'm an obsessive learner and I like thinking about stuff, and so we're going to share this. If you open your Bibles with me to Matthew chapter 27, verses 50 through 54, but mainly we're focused on verses 52 and 53. I'm looking at this right now in the English Standard. So verse 50 says, "And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit." That's, he died. "And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook and the rocks were split." Cool. Earthquakes and a temple veil ripping. And then it says, "The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many." Now, I'm going to go through a couple different Bible verses or versions and things like that. I've told this story before and talked about how, they talk about on Easter, there was a zombie march on Jerusalem. And I phrase it that way in part because of the absurdity of it, and because it's, I want them to object and say, hey, these aren't zombies. Okay. What are they? And why? And it turns out there's an even weirder aspect to this story that I had just overlooked. And this is one of the key things about this, is that the Bible is a very short book. It's actually 66 books, but it's 66 very short books, letters, actually. For the bulk of them, especially when you get into the New Testament, which is why you can have a simple little New Testament like this. And it doesn't take all that long to read it. I mean, yeah, okay, this one's got a lot of pages, but there's not a lot of content. Matthew, the gospel according to Matthew, which isn't according to Matthew, the traditional name wasn't written by Matthew, at least the overwhelming majority of Bible scholars, both Christian and otherwise, would agree on that. But whoever the author was is the only one who includes this passage about the dead getting up out of their graves and marching on Jerusalem to appear to people. It's an exceptionally weird passage, and I just always went, yep, wow, please explain the zombies to me. But here's the thing that's different, that's weird, that I missed, and thanks go to Bart Ehrman. In verse 52, it says, "The tombs were also opened." If you read this whole thing, the timeline goes, in verse 50, Jesus dies. In verse 51, the temple veil is torn in two and there's an earthquake. In verse 53, verse 52, the tombs are opened and the bodies of the saints awoke or were raised. And in verse 53, it says that they come out of the tombs after his resurrection. And then verse 54 says, when the centurion and those who were with him, keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake, which is, okay, I'll accept that. And what took place, they were filled with awe and said, "Truly, this was the Son of God." There were also many women there looking on from a distance who had followed Jesus from Galilee ministering. Then it goes down to verse 57, where it starts talking about Jesus being buried. Then the next day, they put a guard at the tomb. And then we go on to chapter 28, which talks about the resurrection. Why does verse 53 say that they came out of their tombs after his resurrection. I had never paid any attention to that. And yet I find out that this is something that a number of scholars have talked about over the years, because there are things about it that don't make sense. There's lots of things about the resurrection that don't make sense, not the least of which is that we have 4 different gospels attesting to things. And by the way, if you're not happy with the English Standard Version, the King James, the Authorized Version 1611, says, and came out of the graves after his resurrection. The same thing is in the literal version. And coming forth out of the tombs after his resurrection. It's there, it's there in the Greek, but you can't read it. No, I can't read it. Some of you can probably read it. Came forth after his resurrection. That's Murdoch. I'm just randomly picking. This is the World English Bible, coming out of the tombs after his resurrection. English Revised Version, coming out of came out of their graves, and after Jesus was raised from the dead, they went into the holy city. That's the easy to read version. There's the Darby version, going out of the tombs after his arising. So all of them are in agreement. Contemporary English, then after Jesus had risen to life, they came out of the graves and went to the holy city, where they were seen by many people. First of all, this is really strange because it's the only gospel that includes this thing, and it's in a strange order. Jesus dies, some stuff happens. By the way, later they come out, some more stuff happens, and then you get to the resurrection. And then the verse, which should be one that talks about this, would be maybe 28 around verse 6. Because in verse 5, the angel says to the women, don't be afraid, for I know you're looking for Jesus who was nailed to the cross. He isn't here. God's raised him to life just as Jesus said he would. Come see the place where his body was lying. This is the common English version, but we can go back to English Standard Version. In any case, what's happened here is that passage about the dead coming out of their graves and going into Jerusalem should be happening in chapter 28, verse 6. And instead, it is a throwaway line in chapter 27 at verse 53. Why? And why does nobody else mention it? And why is it seemingly insignificant and unimportant? I mean, this is the dead rising up. You see, when Matthew tells the story, Jesus is buried that evening, which presumably is Friday. By the way, if you go around searching whether or not Jesus died on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, you'll get a whole bunch of different answers. And then some of the apologetics pages will say things like, oh, it doesn't really matter what day. All that matters is that he died. In order for him to rise, he had to die. Whether it happened on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday doesn't matter. But it does matter when you're looking into prophecy about 3 days and 3 nights in the grave. Because if he died late Friday and was buried then and rose Sunday morning, that's like a day and a half at best. That's not 3 days. Oh, but it counts as Friday and Saturday and Sunday. It was over a span of 3 days. Cool. They didn't list it by hours. We're fine. Rationalize it however you want. The story doesn't make sense. And we've gone through, various attempts to reconcile the Easter accounts. Who got to the tomb first? Was the stone already rolled away? Was there anybody there? What happened there? Who spoke to whom? Who did they leave and go talk to, and everything else? There's no agreement across the Gospels, but this is an oddity because it only appears in Matthew. No other Gospel mentions zombies marching on Jerusalem. If you get to chapter 28, it was the end of the Sabbath, Sunday morning, the first day of the week. Mary Magdalene supposedly gets there. There's an earthquake, and they go let the disciples know. The disciples go to Galilee, and Jesus meets with 11 disciples there. Because why? Because Judas is already dead, which means he meets with all 11 of them, and yet somehow he didn't meet with Thomas, which is already strange, but we'll just assume that he met with 10, and then he met with Thomas, and that counts as 11, and because we're condensing all of this down into here's a sentence that describes, 23 different things, and then that's followed by the Great Commission, and it's over. The resurrection is the single most important thing. Everything else is just a preacher and a death. And the Gospels have virtually nothing of substance about the resurrection or afterwards, just that it happened. I mean, that's great, because if you're not making broad claims, it's going to be even harder to disprove. It's going to be harder to prove as well, but you're kind of stuck. It does matter when he died. It does matter how long he was dead with regard to some prophecies, but they're right. If there's a scribal error and he died on Thursday and it came closer to 3 days, yeah, we can kind of sideline that. But if dead people are getting up and going in to appear to people after he's resurrected, why include the fact that they came back to life or they awoke, depending on the translation you want to go with, when he died? It's the resurrection that matters, but it's barely mentioned and it's unclear. Matthew is the only one that has this. And even then, you could have just said, and it wouldn't have felt completely out of place, even though it's injected prior to the resurrection. If you moved it to chapter 28 in Matthew, you'd have, basically the angel says, hey, what are you looking for? Oh, no, he's gone. And by the way, there are many dead people that just walked into Jerusalem to appear to people because Jesus has raised them from the dead too. Wow, that's cool. But instead, Matthew tells a story that is 27 words in Greek that just describe, hey, when he died, dead came back to life and then sat there in their graves for a day and a half, or 3 days if you want to give them the full 3 days, just sat there. And then when Jesus rose, they all came back out. Now, Bart Ehrman, when he talked about this, and I highly recommend going to hear what he has to say and what other scholars have to say about all this, because I don't think there's any resolution, but it's prompted, and there's a couple other videos that'll be coming in the near future to talk about what the authors had in their mind when they wrote this stuff. Why were certain things included? Why were certain things left out? But Ehrman suggested that this particular element of the story about the dead rising and then appearing, scholars have explained it in the sense that it's a narrative element designed to show that while they came back to life, they weren't permitted to come back and interact until Jesus had risen. So essentially, when you're telling a story and you want to tell this story, it was important for the author of Matthew, seemingly, this is supposition because we don't have an explanation, it seemed important to the author of Matthew to say something equivalent to, his death brought life, but his resurrection brought freedom. Because you can't say the resurrection brought life if they came back to life when he died. So his death is the entry to life, and his resurrection is the entry to freedom. That sounds really good. I'm sure some preacher will hear this and steal it and use it in a sermon or talk about how this atheist was completely wrong and missed the point or whatever else. That's fine. We're still talking about a book with one sentence that mentions the dead waking up from their sleep on Friday when he died and leaving their graves on Sunday when he's raised, and then appearing to many and telling us nothing about what they do, what they say, who saw them, what interaction there was, why any of this happened, what happened to them afterwards. Did they go back to their graves? Did they die again because it's appointed unto man once to die? Were they, did they proceed directly to heaven? And by the way, don't all of these resurrections cheapen the resurrection of Jesus? The supposition there is that much like Lazarus or anybody else that was raised in there, that they died again. And Jesus is the only one that was resurrected from the dead, never to die again. But all of that is just inferred from story elements and not mentioned. It's like these individuals can't tell a story that is clear. I've used more words and spent more time just investigating those couple of sentences or that one sentence of 27 words, then the Bible spends on it in its entirety, and only one of the gospel authors even mentions it at all. This is not a book that contains a clear story. This is not a book that contains a verifiable or valuable story. This is not a book that contains a story that we can verify is true. If the dead rise, that deserves more than 27 words. Hey, that's exactly as many words as there are books in the New Testament canon. Maybe that's important. Maybe this one sentence of 27 words is supposed to echo something for the entirety. Oh my goodness. That's the way people reading this stuff find messages and then spread them without ever thinking, why is there a single sentence that is taken out of the timeline? Why do you tell a story that goes, somebody died, these people woke up, and later when he's resurrected, they're going to go march into the city. Then they buried him. Then they secured his tomb. Then the women went to the tomb, and that's when they rose. Why not put it there? If there's a God, he's a terrible inspirer. And the individuals who wrote this are terrible at telling a story. And yet, it's supposedly the greatest story ever told. And yet, it has changed the lives of many people. Why? Because in much the way that Matthew injects this, the dead hung around for a day and a half to 3 days waiting, sidetrack of his, theists sidetrack all of it to read into it the things that matter most to them and seem most important to them. Is this from God or from people? I don't know, but it's spooky. Ooh, zombies. See you next time.